Namaste, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from WWF-India, wherever you are viewing us from. This is the first of the webinar series which we will be conducting to reach out to as many development and conservation enthusiasts as possible. We have named it NAT-INFRA Dialogues. This webinar is a part of an activity under Asia's Linear Infrastructure Safeguarding Nature Aligned project, which is funded by United States Agency for International Development, USAID, and is being implemented in India, Nepal, and Mongolia by WWF and Center for Large Landscape Conservation. India is home to the biggest population of iconic flagship species like the Asian elephant, the greater one-horned rhino, and the Bengal tiger. The landscape which are home to these wildlife species, however, are under pressure from linear infrastructure like roads, highways, railways, power lines, and irrigation canals, which are imperative in meeting India's national aspirations to become a developed economy by 2047. Realizing a need for coordinated efforts from the development and conservation stakeholders, WWF India has collaborated with Consulting Engineers Association of India to promote conservation-friendly linear infrastructure development approaches. This collaboration brings you the NAT-INFRA Dialogues, which is a webinar series on strengthening natural resources safeguards in linear infrastructure development in India, which will be covering issues like challenges, opportunities, and actions required to ensure sustainable development. We hope and believe the learnings can help us build a better sustainable world going forward. But before we move ahead, I'd like to share a disclaimer. These webinars are being recorded and will be available online as learning resources through WWF India and CEAI's social media outlets. There will be 2 presentations in the webinar, and we will be taking the questions at the end of the 2 presentations. You can type in your questions in the chat box. So to begin with, I would like to introduce you to all to Mr. Varghese Paul, Deputy Director, Environment and Natural Resources, General Development Office, USAID India. USAID has been a long-time continued supporter of conservation initiatives of WWF, Align, Linear Infrastructure Safeguard in Asia, and Asia High Mountains Project are some of the dedicated infrastructure conservation funding initiatives by USAID. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank you all for joining this webinar today. USAID is proud to co-host this meeting with Consulting Engineers Association of India, WWF, and Center for Large Landscape Conservation through the Align project. I would also warmly welcome Mr. Sudhi Dhawan from CEAI and our 2 distinguished speakers for this webinar, Dr. Dibanga Ghosh and Engineer Alok Bhaumik. For those of you who may not be familiar with USAID, it is the United States government's lead development agency working in more than 100 countries around the world to tackle some of the most pressing development challenges. Among other things, USAID work advances economic prosperity and promotes environmental conservation. For economic prosperity and development to be sustainable over the long term, vital natural resources, including biodiversity, needs to be responsibly managed and secured. This is fundamental to increasing human well-being. In India, USAID has supported biodiversity conservation over the past decade. One of our earlier projects, Tiger Matters, looked at strengthening protection mechanism within and outside the boundaries of tiger reserves. This project focused on central Indian landscape, which we all know is home to a large percentage of India's tigers. This project brought to light the existence of a robust tiger population outside the boundaries of protected areas. This in turn highlighted the need to conserve corridors to ensure genetic viability of tigers. We are continuing our engagement in the central Indian landscape and other important biodiversity-rich landscapes in India through our Strengthening Landscape Management and Conservation project. Through this project, USAID will strengthen the management of protected areas, buffer areas, support development of corridors, enhance livelihoods from ecosystem services, and address human-wildlife conflict. As we all realize, in various parts of the world, including in India, habitat loss, degradation, and fragmentation is a major concern for wildlife, including for wildlife movement, and leads to increasing human-wildlife conflict. In many cases, this fragmentation is a result of development of linear infrastructure, such as roads, railway lines, canals, and transmission lines. And in order to better understand the issues in Asia, including in India, USAID supported a study titled Linear Infrastructure Safeguards in Asia, or LISA in short. LISA provided a better understanding of the current capacity of government agencies, financial institutions, private sector, and civil society organizations in promoting and enforcing wildlife-friendly safeguards for leaded infrastructure. The the Align project, which was mentioned a couple of minutes ago, builds on the findings of LISA, and through the leadership of WWF and Center for Large Landscape Conservation, and with investment from USAID, Align is working with governments and other stakeholders to create policies that enable nature positive investment, demonstrate best practices, develop partnerships, and build capacity in incorporating wildlife friendly safeguards in infrastructure development. We have seen that some good examples exist. As was mentioned earlier, we are hosting these webinars to raise awareness about what is possible among the conservation community, as well as engineers and government agencies. I look forward to the discussion today with a strong belief that conservation and infrastructure are not an either or, but can occur at the same time. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir, for your kind introductory remarks. I would like to introduce Mr. Sudhir Dhawan. Mr. Dhawan has a long experience of more than 45 years in engineering and management. His experience covers engineering consultancies for infrastructure, railway, metro rail, chemical and petrochemicals, gas pipelines, LNG, LPG terminals, thermal and hydropower projects. Mr. Dhawan is currently the president of FIDIC Asia Pacific. FIDIC is the International Federation for Consulting Engineers. He has previously served as the chairman of CEAI and many other institutions in India. The floor is yours, Mr. Dhawan.
Thank you very much, Somrit. I think it's a very exciting time for engineers to know about the nature, and we are very excited of signing a MOU with WWF after more than 1 year of interaction. I think the idea of this joining is extremely good, especially when large infrastructure development is happening in India and engineers are not aware of the impact they are causing on the wildlife and the flora and fauna and environment. So through this collaboration, we propose to have a series of webinars almost every month to impart this knowledge and to train the engineers in facing the reality of nature, which has already impacted all of us all over the world. I think we are also going to develop some standards, and for that we need a team of experts, and we welcome volunteers for that, and we will develop standards and propose to the government so that these standards are adopted by all the authorities in the government. I think FIDIC and WWF started this collaboration more than a year back, and the first playbook was created last year, and this playbook has helped in understanding the environment of nature and engineering infrastructure. Many of the engineers may not even know the full new form of WWF, and this is the condition where we are and how we are going to teach them to know what is WWF and how it's going to work for it. So I think we have two exciting speakers today from WWF and Alok Bhomik from CEI, so that they can cover both the aspects of the nature and of the engineering development, design and construction. Thank you very much and welcome to all of you. I hope you will attend our future webinars. Give your suggestions to CEI or WWF as you go through this. And my welcome also to Mary, who could not join from Washington, D.C., but she has been helping us and promoting us and encouraging us to do these functions. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for your kind introductory remarks. I would like to introduce you to the facilitator of the webinar, Mr. Pramod Napane, lead of the line project here at WWF-India. Mr. Napane is a civil and structural engineer. He's an environmental science and management graduate, having an interest in sustainable infrastructure development. The floor is yours, Pramodji.
Thank you, Somrit, for the kind introduction. Dear infrastructure and conservation enthusiasts, we have initiated this webinar series with an aim to increase awareness and sensitivity of the growing need of infrastructure development, which is of paramount importance to ensure India meets its target to become a developed nation. With the pace of development prioritization by the country, this seems definitely achievable. However, achieving the target while maintaining a balance between infrastructure development and nature conservation will always remain a challenge. The idea, thus, is to think and act in a direction where engineers, planners, developers, and conservationist stakeholders sit together to plan, implement, and monitor infrastructure projects, ensuring the viability and long-term sustainability of not just the project, but also the Mother Earth, which we all call our home. India has 6.5 million kilometers of roads as per 2021 statistics, including national highways, state highways, district, urban, rural, and project roads. The Ministry of Roads, Transport and Highways has constructed 12,349 kilometers of national highways in the last fiscal year 2023. Currently, the pace of development of highways in India is 35 kilometers per day, which the government wishes to reach to a target of 50 kilometers a day. Likewise, the National Rail Network of India comprises of total route length of 68,907 kilometers, which is the fourth largest in the world. Priorities are set for high-speed trains to cater the growing needs for swift commute. Similar is the scenario of power lines and irrigation canals, where the demand is always on the higher side to meet the public needs. Despite all these linear infrastructures have a common motive of supporting lives and livelihoods, they have greater impacts to the nature and biodiversity if not checked properly. By these webinars, we aim to reach out to as much development and conservation stakeholders and enthusiasts to help co-create a learning environment where existing practitioners and upcoming generation of practitioners will identify and learn the challenges and opportunities of ensuring natural resources safeguards in linear infrastructure development and also devise sustainable solutions to meet this aspiration. We shall be conducting these webinars once every month for the rest of this year, and we'll try to cover issues-based discussions on aligning ourselves towards devising solutions to the challenges posed by linear infrastructure development or natural environment. Today, we have two prominent speakers, each from WWF-India and CEAI. The first presenter is Dr. Dipankar Ghosh, Senior Director, Biodiversity Conservation in WWF-India. He's a veteran wildlife biologist and a conservation manager, currently leading the program for terrestrial and aerial wildlife conservation in the organization. He supervises a team of 150 staff members working in 9 landscapes in the country. He has a passion in photography. He has authored multiple short articles towards contributing to conservation successes in India and beyond. I'd like to ask you, Dr. Ghosh, what is the scenario of linear infrastructures within and nearby protected areas and wildlife corridors in India? What should be the way forward to minimize the impacts? Dr. Ghosh, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Pramodji, and namaskar, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everyone. Sudhirji was talking about WWF. When we started in India about 55 years back, it was the World Wildlife Fund. But towards the turn of the century, we figured out that to conserve wildlife, one needs to conserve much more. And essentially, it's about nature and people. So we changed our name, and it is Worldwide Fund for Nature India. So that's in short form, WWF India. India is home to large mammals, and we all know about it. Last year, when the population estimates for tigers came out, where our Honorable Prime Minister declared the numbers close to 3,700, it is also almost 3/4 of the global tiger population. India is also home to Indian rhinos or greater one-horned rhinos. And again, about 75% of those one-horned rhinos are in India. And when we talk about the largest land mammal, the Asian elephants in our continent, 2/3 of those animals are also here. Now, why in such a country, in such a big country, we have all these animals where we also have 1.4 billion people? What is the matter? The essence of it is that it's tolerance of people for wildlife, for large mammals, but also the space that is available. So these large mammals, they occupy large territories. They are territorial animals, and they do fairly well when they occur in landscapes, in fairly large landscapes. So in India, what we are doing now is landscape level conservation planning. And if you follow how the National Tiger Conservation Authority under the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, Government of India, is planning or has planned or conducted the annual tiger estimation exercise, or the All India Tiger Estimation Exercise, which happens every 4 years, that takes place at a landscape level. There is Gangetic Plains, Northeast, Central India, because these animals are not just inside a particular protected area, they move out and they move through corridors. I'll come to that. Why landscapes? Because landscapes look at larger populations, at meta populations, rather than looking at very small PA-based population. It goes beyond the boundaries of protected areas. And what happens then? It helps in recovery of species. If one protected area, for some reason, maybe stochastic reasons or genetic reasons, or maybe poaching, suddenly gets a decline in a particular species, animals from different protected areas within the landscape, if the connectivity is good and with good conservation push, can recover in that particular protected area. So populations can move in response to changes, environmental changes, sometimes natural disasters. If you are watching the national news or looking at any media, any print media, particularly from Northeast India, you will see that flooding is happening in Kaziranga. There are pictures of rhinos and elephants in human-dominated spaces. Elephants are crossing over a highway, a national highway. And people are watching, people are allowing that elephant to pass. The government has invested a lot of resources to ensure that people are safe and all these animals are also safe. So that talks about tolerance, coexistence, but it also talks about the connectivity. If Kaziranga is not connected with Karbi Anglong landscape, then these elephants or tigers or rhinos or deers won't have a safe passage from Kaziranga down south to the hills of Karbi Anglong, which are on higher grounds. And lastly, the threatened species can be replenished from other areas also, which requires active management. For instance, there is this fantastic example we now have from the Tarai Arc landscape, where western part of Rajaji Tiger Reserve lost quite a few tigers, and the population came down to 2 individuals. But in the last few years, with sustained efforts from the Uttarakhand Forest Department, a lot of support from NTCA and WWF's investment in that particular area, we have been able to bring tigers back to Western Rajaji. And recently there has been success in the whole process, because we have found tigers breeding there. 2 tigresses have given birth to cubs there. So landscape conservation is important. That is a fact. But what do we call a landscape? What is the structure of a landscape? This is a very simplistic design. We have core habitat patches and multiple habitat patches, which are essentially the source populations, or which are essentially the protected areas. And in between these habitat patches, we have continuous corridors, so that animals, large mammals, which need larger territory, they can move through these corridors. Now, what happens when disturbance or fragmentation occurs in these landscapes? The corridors disappear. Now, if a corridor disappears, or if both corridors disappear, or there are more corridors which get fragmented, what happens? Then it becomes patches. It's no more connected. The connection needs to stay. What we have started seeing now is that instead of continuous corridor, there are stepping stone corridors. And what is a stepping stone? This is monsoon. We all have seen when there is water logging on the streets or on the footpaths. We try to get bricks and stones and stools to step over the, not touch water, but go over the water from one stepping stone to another to cross a short distance at times, while one is alighting from the vehicle and going home or going to a shop. So that's a stepping stone corridor. Now, stepping stone corridors also work, but the problem happens when these stepping stones are removed. It is no more a corridor then. Then the corridor is completely fragmented or it has already disappeared. What happens then? The habitat patches become isolated and the landscape integrity starts breaking, starts falling apart, which we don't want. So these large mammals need landscapes which are connected. I mean, this is the example of a connected landscape, seemingly. There are source and sink and corridors. So source and sink are under classic ecological theories, and corridors are also very important for maintaining landscape integrity. One of my previous speakers was also talking about the phenomenal investment that our country is making on a development pathway. These are figures from January this year. India is trying to become a third largest economy. Currently, it is the fifth largest economy with 3.2 trillion US dollars. And the idea is to go to something like $5 trillion in about 3 years' time. How does it get it? What is the pathway? The pathway is to make more investments. And what is the capital cost in comparison to 5 countries, the big economies? If you look at India, the cost of capital, which is real estate, retail, trucking, or construction, is actually pretty high, which means the road network, the linear infrastructure, the railway network, all these need to be developed further. So there is a push for linear infra development. If we look at linear infra development in a conservation landscape, which is Central India landscape, or rather the Satpura Michael landscape where we work, there is already 16,000 kilometers of highway, and the railways, these data are slightly dated, more than 2,000 kilometers of railways line. And this green polygon, it kind of looks like a netted. So all these network of the brown lines and red lines, these are all the linear infrastructure. And the more netted it becomes, the green starts disappearing or starts fragmenting. And that is the worry of conservationists. I think that is also the worry of very sensitized engineers. They are also saying that, well, roads have to be constructed, and Alokji is one of them. And they're saying, the engineers have also saying, and Sudhirji also mentioned, that these roads need to have natural safeguards. So they should not fragment the landscape connectivity. Now, how does that happen? Before I get into the details and share a case study, what is happening in the country due to these large infrastructures and stuff? So due to train and vehicle hits, if you see about 5 years back, pre-COVID data, a lot of elephants got killed. Tigers also got killed. Tigers are fast animals, but still 5 tigers were killed on railway tracks and on roads. It keeps happening. When we looked at elephant mortality in India, and particularly unnatural mortality, you will see that quite a lot of these elephants died due to electrocution, where power lines, again, another form of linear infrastructure, there has been sagging power lines, and elephants got electrocuted, and that's what they died. 60 elephants dying, 65 elephants dying in a year is almost like 5 elephants dying every month, is something which is not tolerable, and government departments are working towards reducing this kind of accidental deaths. What happens when fragmentation happens? As I was telling you, is that when a road cuts through a forest or a corridor, what happens? The first one is wildlife mortality. That's like the direct impact where there is a train hit or a road hit or a vehicle hit where the animal dies. None of us, we want to see a dead animal on a road. That needs to be reduced, and there is behavior change measure which we are trying to take up. There are different other measures like speed breakers and speed sensors and speed limiters, which are also needed to reduce wildlife mortality in the roads which pass through wildlife habitats. The second one is that when habitat degradation happens, then there is a block. Animals they don't cross through these corridors. But even if a mitigation measure, like even if an animal passage is planned along that linear infrastructure, if it is not carried out within a certain amount of time, then these animal population starts avoiding that plan, that particular area, that particular location. So even if a particular safeguard or passage is constructed, because it has not happened within a critical period, the animal population or a particular group of animals might start avoiding that area, which also isolates population, and that is not desirable. Looking at linear infra growth, I'm not reading out the figures, but just the year that ended in March, 13,000 plus kilometer of highways was planned in the country with an outlay of US $34 billion. That's a huge investment for a country which is on its development pathway. I'm not sure how much of that money got spent, but I'm assuming that a major amount of that has been spent, and this allocation perhaps is going to get bigger in the years to come, where we will see a lot of these highways getting constructed. Now, how natural safeguards are getting integrated in these kind of construction, whether these are highways or whether these are railway tracks. Let's have a look at it. Again, another slide showing how the growing infrastructure in Indian forests. We have seen that large infrastructures have reduced forest patches in the last few decades. Some of the protected areas in India which have got linear infrastructure passing through them, there are reports, not very frequent, but still there are reports of animal hits. The density is also quite high in some areas. And then again, we have also seen that land has also been diverted for linear infra development, which is certainly larger than particular two cities in UK. That's a comparison to show that how big an area which has been diverted. Projects are coming up. These developments should happen. But that's why when Mr. Varghese was also talking about is that how important it is to have safeguards in place so that the road construction continues, but road construction continues only when there are safeguards or only when there is proper planning so that it doesn't affect the natural landscapes or well-being of wildlife. Does mitigation work? We are talking about mitigation, but does it really work? Now, here is a case study from Assam, and I'm particularly interested to talk about this because this is also very interesting because this is also linked with Kaziranga, and that is an area which is seeing a lot of floods. Animals are moving southwards. This is from the Kaziranga Karbi Anglong landscape, and if you see the brown lines and the railway track, this NH54E, this particular highway about 13 years back, there were plans to expand it. And before we could approach the forest department, the road cutting had already started. That was at the same point of time we had reached out to Alokji and we were trying to do something. So we reached out to the Assam Forest Department, and together we reached out to National Highways Authority of India and PWD, and they said, hey, yes, let's do something together. So initially there were kind of passages like these which are constructed, and we had discussions with engineers and said that, look, very small mammals might go through this kind of culverts or this kind of animal passages, but if we are talking about an elephant reserve, and elephants won't pass through. This looks like a tunnel for an elephant, and elephants need larger passages now. There are guidelines, there are documents from the government of India published by the Ministry of Environment and Forest and Wildlife Institute of India, which says that the size of these passages need to be of a certain extent. So we started working with scientists, with engineers, and retrofitting started. And where construction had not happened, then design inputs started. NHAI was superb. They started accepting some of these ideas. We had data long-term data, I would say, over 1.5 decades on these animal crossing points. And we started working together with the engineers and trying to sensitize the civil engineers on where all animal crossings have to be prepared, and also ensuring that while construction of the road, on the sides, the natural vegetation needs to be maintained as much as possible in its natural and pristine form, because otherwise, even if we construct, or even if an HAI constructs the animal passage, if the road or if the path or the forest that leads to that passage gets disturbed, then animals will not use that. So it started, animal passages were constructed, sound barriers were put along some of these animal passages so that light and sound should not come down to the nearby forest patches. Some of the forest patches leading to these underpasses or these animal passages where restoration was carried out together with the contractors and by the forest department in Assam. And lo and behold, after the construction, we started seeing animals crossing it. Initially, they were small mammals. And then later we found that elephants and elephant herds, including their calves, started crossing it, even if there was a little bit of waterlogging, which means that elephants started finding these passages safe. And that is why they started crossing through these animal passages or underpasses. I mean, that's a superb example where not just carnivores like leopards, and there are examples from NH7 in Madhya Pradesh and Maharashtra where tigers are crossing through underpasses. We have a great example where NHAI, with the help of Assam Forest Department and WWF, has constructed these underpasses, and elephants are regularly using it. And this is something which is a win-win situation where the engineers worked in tandem with the biologists, with the ecologists, and understood the requirement of this wildlife. And it actually will help elephant conservation. Another quick example, the Chila-Motichur corridor. Many of the people who visit Dehradun by road or visit Haridwar by road might have passed through the Chila-Motichur corridor. While you pass through the corridor on the overpass or on the flyover, the forest on either sides, and we have seen elephants, leopards, and even tigers crossing under the highway because of the animal passages have been maintained. Restoration has been done by the forest department, and together again NHAI and the Uttarakhand Forest Department are doing a fabulous job to ensure that these underpasses or animal passages they remain functional. Just before I end, what we are trying to do is that WWF alone, of course, we now have a partnership with CEAI, and my sincere thanks to Sudhir Dhawanji, Alokji, and everyone else at CEAI for this partnership and for supporting our work. I would like to also thank USAID, Mary, and Bagis, and everyone else. But what we are doing on the ecology side, on the conservation side, there are many wildlife corridors which have been identified by the conservationists, by the forest department, by the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. And some of these corridors have challenges. There are development challenges, there are anthropogenic pressures, and it is not humanly possible for one organization or one forest department to address those challenges and even like monitoring those corridors on a regular basis. So what we have now is something like a CWC. This is a coalition for wildlife corridors. It's like some sort of a group, an informal group of conservation NGOs within the country, where we are working with the forest departments. Recently, we have had meetings with the Madhya Pradesh Forest Department, with the Maharashtra Forest Department, where we exchange information and do joint planning on how these corridors can be conserved for posterity and how we address some of the challenges which are coming up on these corridors. And information from all these organizations, researchers are put together to address the threats. I must also say that in recent times, there has been a phase change from the developing agency side, and particularly from Ministry of Road Transport and Highways in 2019. This was like music to our ears when MoRTH came out with this notification that saying that avoid road construction in areas where you have wildlife habitats like sanctuaries and national park. It also says that all efforts shall be made to avoid any road alignment through the parks, and where it is absolutely unavoidable, then there has to be proper mitigation. I mean, with that intent, I'm sure that we will have a better future and we will be able to provide safe passage to people through these roads, but also ensure that large mammals like elephants or tigers also have a safe passage through these roads or railway tracks. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ghosh, for your insightful presentation and the way forward, how we also focus on achieving these developmental targets while minimizing the impacts on natural resources. We'll be taking these questions. We have some questions already in the Q&A section, but later after this another presentation. Next, we have Mr. Alok Vomik. Mr. Vomik is an eminent bridge engineer with over 4 decades of experience in the field of bridge and structural engineering. He's an active member of several professional associations, like the past president of Indian Association of Structural Engineers, governing council member of Consulting Engineers Association of India, tax group member of International Association of Bridge Management and Safety, among others. He's a fellow at the Indian National Academy of Engineering, which comprises of India's most distinguished engineers, engineer scientists, and technologists, covering the entire spectrum of engineering disciplines. He has written and published more than 100 technical papers in different national and international journals. I would like to pose a question to Mr. Vomik. What are your observations about the changes in safeguard measures in the last decade in India? How do you evaluate the evolution of these safeguards being implemented in linear infrastructure projects? Please take it away, Mr. Vomik.
Thank you, Pramodji. Can you please give me? Okay, thank you. So, first of all, thanks to WWF and CEAI for giving me this opportunity to present my thoughts. This is something, you see, I am a structural engineer. I am not a wildlife conservationist, or I am an enthusiast. And very interestingly, I have had an interaction with WWF in 2015 on similar kind of topic. And I remember having given a presentation way back at that time with the World Bank team on a similar basis. So let me start on this presentation. And basically, the brief presentation is to sensitize the civil engineering fraternity about the need to understand the role of civil engineers, structural engineers, highway engineers in protecting our nature and in mitigating the loss of biodiversity. You see, as my previous speaker has mentioned, the biodiversity is key to building a sustainable infrastructure. It is essential for all life on Earth, and it is no longer something, quote unquote, nice to have. I mean, we cannot afford to do without it. However, the fact of the matter is that despite many strict regulations and laws in India in place regarding environmental improvement, but often we have seen that when it comes to implementation, there are a lot of impediments. Biodiversity losses have been accepted as a price we pay for development. And the fact of the matter is, whenever you have a choice between development vis-a-vis protecting the environment, invariably I have found that the development takes a sort of upper edge. And as I mentioned, we engineers have a major role to play in preserving this nature, in repairing our planet Earth against the loss of biodiversity. Every construction project in a protected area, or as Dr. Ghosh mentioned, landscape, that is even beyond the protected area, there is an opportunity to rectify some of the wrongs, some of the bad practices that we follow, and there is tremendous scope, in improving the way we design our highway and bridges. So let me begin by saying that, ever since the mass production of cars began way back in 20th century beginning, the motor vehicles have come to dominate our planet. Starting in 50s and 60s, the construction of modern highways has kept pace with the growing transportation needs of human beings. And most of the growth in the auto manufacturing sector is basically in this part of the world, India, China, Thailand. And in fact, in the last 25 years, these three nations have put together and increased their production from 3 million to 34 million, I mean, almost 10 times. So this today, some of the, that is in fact the preamble for why the infrastructure growth is so much, at what pace it is going in India. And today, some of the fastest road expansion is happening in India. Not only we are building new roads, but we are also, 4-laning, 6-laning, or 8-laning our existing 2-lane roads or single-lane road. And wherever such highways are cutting through the protected areas, the consequences to wildlife we have seen is, horrendous. In our Hindu culture, wild animals enjoyed the divine status as the vahana or vehicle of deities, and we call them vahanas. Each deity vahana can be seen as a symbolic representation of deity's power or a meaning within the pantheon of Hindu deities. However, today we see that there are being run over in record numbers, as Dr. Dipankar Ghosh mentioned. He has given records, whether it is train or whether it is highway vehicles on the road, or whether it is a high volt transmission lines. We have seen several casualties. Very few countries in the world can match India's natural diversity and richness, as we can see. And if you really look at the history and the records, India is very, very rich in terms of natural diversity. Our nation is home to the largest population of wild tigers. The only population of lions outside Africa is in India. And as Dr. Ghosh already mentioned, we have the largest number of Asian elephants existing in India. And there has been a very steep increase in the one-horned rhino population in the country over the last 40 years or so. But with this vast area of forest lost to agriculture and urbanization, most of these India's large mammals have a safe existence only in our protected areas, so-called natural parks and sanctuaries. Yet, even these protected areas, as well as the critical corridors that connect them, are under pressure from many of the development projects, particularly the linear infrastructure. Now, for some uninitiated in this, among the participants, let me explain the term linear infrastructure. The linear infrastructure, there are two types of infrastructure we have, linear or non-linear, which is spatial. When we talk about linear infrastructure, they are those civil engineering works which has linear geometry, such as roads, railways, pipelines, high voltage lines, or similar structural work with significantly more in length rather than the width, implying that it has got a borderline effect. Whereas a non-linear or a spatial infrastructure are those that do not follow the linear pattern and proceed in space. For example, buildings, where it may be called vertical infrastructure, or maybe a township where you don't follow a one linear line, but a three-dimensional. The problem with roads and the linear infrastructure is whenever there are many casualties, because they basically fragment the protected area when it is cutting across the protected area, and they can be very fatal. Whether it is roads or rail, there are examples, multiple examples of the killing of mammals, large mammals or birds, animals, etc. Beyond the threat of direct visible impacts, all these linear intrusions have one immense indirect and long-term consequences. They divide the natural habitat and thus weaken its ecological integrity. And I think Dr. Ghosh has very nicely explained this fragmentation thing. This is one example where the forest has been bisected in one direction by a high tension power line and in another direction by a road. If you can see the road here and road in the one direction and the power line in the another direction. Therefore, basically it has divided this protected area into four separate fragments. Of the various types of linear infrastructure, a highway or road is in fact the worst enemy for the forest because it exposes its previously untouched interior to a host of problems, and it promotes logging, it promotes poaching, mining, and it is the prime reason for all the man-made forest fires that we have been seeing. Recent Uttarakhand fire is also a good example. To top it all, with vehicles plying day and night, a road also turns the peaceful heart of the forest into a death trap for wildlife. Unfortunately, the animals don't understand the function of these deadly consequences of road, and all animals cannot judge the speed at which the modern vehicles travel. In fact, they often unwittingly use the roads, as a comfortable surface for resting or moving around. And there has to be, well protected, and that is where comes the ingenuity of a highway engineer or a structural engineer as to how to protect, how to divide, and how not to disturb the wildlife. They should be in their natural habitat. Sometimes it is a boon for wildlife to have a poorly maintained road in a forest, because a poorly maintained or a potholed road may force the vehicles to move slowly, giving animals some chance to get out of the way. But when it is paved and resurfaced, even a narrow road can turn to be very deadly. Today, roads and highways running through India's natural parks and sanctuaries are not designed to be safe for humans as well as for animals. A lot is required to be done. I think we are, although there are plenty of guidelines available internationally, but I think we are starving to have a guideline in the Indian Roads Congress, which can be mandated to be a guideline for the highway engineers, so that when they are dealing with highway or bridge or viaduct in the protected areas, they follow those guidelines. A lot is required to be done. What you see on the right-hand side is a brilliant photograph. Actually, it is a video. I have taken a photograph out of that, which shows how a mother monkey is acting as a bridge between the two trees. Below it is the linear infrastructure, just to allow the kid to pass through the body of the mother monkey. And a simple canopy structure probably could facilitate easily to prevent this hassle. So these are some photographs which shows how the infrastructures expose both humans and the animals to a variety of dangers, including pollution, stress, injury, death, etc. India has, as Dr. Ghosh mentioned, India has allocated a vast resource for conserving its national animal, the tiger. Many are killed, but on the highways and that run through or adjoining the same forests that were set aside. This is two photographs of a mother and the three cubs who died when the mother was killed in a road accident. Tigress. Three cubs were found. She was pregnant, and three cubs were found. So what we lost in one accident is not just one tigress, but four wildlife, such precious ones. In 2016, the elephant was deservingly declared as India's national heritage animal. Elephant needs vast home ranges and follow the same traditional routes in search of food, water, shelter, and they generally move in herds. large numbers. And today they have to cope with busy highways that cut across their ancient migratory pathways. And you can see some photographs which demonstrates that. This shows the insensitivity or lack of understanding of the highway engineer. The concrete median provided here is an obstacle to cross the movement of animals. In the left photo, you see a young elephant, just manages to cross the median on its own and being helped by the seniors to sort of cross this crash barrier. What is needed is basically some kind of a compassion, culture, ethics, and ecology, all of those to factor in while designing a linear infrastructure passing through the forest areas, be it road, be it rail, or high voltage transmission lines. What is needed is a little bit of knowledge. I don't claim that the highway engineer or the bridge engineer has to be a conservationist necessarily, but a basic knowledge and sensitivity about the wildlife is very, very essential for the designers and the constructors to understand and appreciate, and then it should not be considered as being forced upon, rather than it's an integral part of the structural design or a highway design. Animals often sneak across roads at night but are blinded or disoriented by the vehicle headlights. Deer becomes blinded by the bright light. They freeze until its eyes adjust to that heightened level of brightness. Similarly, vehicle drivers often are unable to see the animals getting, I think we have, okay, crossing in the dark. So vehicle animal collisions are pretty rampant, whether it is the largest or whether it is the smallest or whether it is fastest. Mysore Manantawadi Road through the Nagarhole Tiger Reserve in Karnataka, where a particular portion of the road has been decommissioned and a bypass is provided just to sort of prevent intrusion into the tiger reserve. And I think we can set such examples in future also. You see, just like we do a bypass for a road bypass whenever there is a thickly congested urban area, so that vehicles can go uninterrupted. Same philosophy need to be adopted also when we are passing through the protected areas or national parks. We need to provide first attempt should be to have a bypass. If that bypass becomes little unfeasible, then only we need to consider a linear intrusion through the protected area. It can be an overpass, or it can be an underpass or a viaduct. And today there are plenty of documents available internationally to guide as to what should be, how the underpass or the overpass should be designed, what should be the geometry. Unfortunately, in IRC, we do not have a proper guideline, which must be mandated for the DPR consultant when he is coming out with the bid document and the feasibility of the project. And these are just two examples which I'm showing. This is I think the first animal underpass which was done in Kenya, though I think what Dr. Ghosh mentioned in his presentation, that perhaps for the animals like elephants, the big mammals, the underpass sizes and all, here being the first one long back, so probably this would require actually wider underpass is required for elephants, but this is just an example. Highways and roads running through a wildlife habitat must be fenced off and animals funneled towards the frequently spaced and properly designed overpasses. What you see here is a good detailing, and I think it is not just a structure that is important, but along with the structure, the other road furniture details, the fences, everything is a part of a holistic design, and that is what I find is missing in our road infrastructure. Wildlife overpasses or underpasses are most often designed to improve opportunities for species that are specific to that project. I mean, one needs to have a good idea as it has to be a species specific design. Structures passing through forests require different skill level of the planners and designers. Attention is needed in fixing the vertical clearance, the horizontal clearances, the vegetation design of the infrastructure, the texture, the color, lighting arrangement, signages. It should be something which has minimum hindrance to the site. Most of the elements should be precast elsewhere and brought to site and very quickly sort of executed. Although many a times we face the challenge as a designer that when even with all good intention, when we try to do a structure, we keeping all these things into mind, it works out that the actual structural cost is multiple times that of a conventional structure, which from the perspective of the road engineer is extra. So that mindset kills the proposal, because oftentimes, for example, when you are doing an overpass, the width of the overpass depends on the type of species for which you have to design the overpass. It will not merely depend on some minimum which you think is required. Similarly, when you are doing an underpass, you need to provide for the geometry, the length, width, and height according to the the species that you are supposed to cross over on top of that. So all these things may require little extra cost, but then that cost should be one has to look at it from also the biodiversity point of view. You have to spend some money to protect the biodiversity. Next, typically when we are planning a highway, the highest priority, as I mentioned, is given to the shortest route between the 2 points, even if that is likely to cause irreparable devastation. But we should have a very clear idea that long-term ecological ill effects are to be factored in. And if required, we should first try for a bypass. And if bypass is not feasible, then only we go into cutting across the wildlife. This is a good example of a decommissioned road where you can see how the tigers relaxing in this decommissioned road through the Nagarhole Tiger Reserve. In case of overpasses, its width and locations are very, very important criteria for suitability of such structures for large mammals. In general, the larger mammals require wider overpasses than small vertebrates. The vegetation on the overpass should reflect the habitats situated on either side of the infrastructure. The intention is to guide the largest species and a variety of other animals to use the overpass to get across. I mean, the whole concept design should be full encapsulation. In some cases, of course, it makes sense to elevate an entire sections. We have many projects where we are doing one in Bangalore, Mysore, where a large portion of the portion passing through the forest area is elevated. Essentially, where there is a will, there are many ways to minimize the negative impacts of the road and highway. What is required is a mindful approach to development that factors nature into the planning process. Even in case of viaduct, what is very, very important is what design you are following, what kind of a construction methodology you are proposing, and that also has an impact, as Dr. Ghosh pointed out, that if you bring an obstruction even for temporarily for a period of 1 or 2 years, maybe the animals will change their course. So that is also very, very important. Sadly, most of the highways running through the India's wildlife reserve have no mitigation measures at all. In other cases, attempts at mitigations have been very half-hearted or improperly executed. There are today, several, guidelines available, and I think many of them are available. You just Google out and you can get them. Otherwise, they can be, I'm sure, made available through WWF. These are very, very useful guideline for design. In fact, comprehensive guidelines prepared by Indian ecologists, including those from the Wildlife Institute of India, have clearly laid out solutions, technical solutions. Very interestingly, I found this guideline, CEAI and WWF join hands and bring out a guideline which is India specific for IRC, for highway, as well as for the railways. Once we do one document, we can do it for other linear infrastructures as well. So I have come to the end of my presentation, and to summarize, I will say that incorporating biodiversity into planning and design of linear infrastructure is the need of the hour. Engineers and developers are required to design, in ways to protect, conserve, improve, or extend biodiversity rather than seek to mitigate the negative impact of construction on biodiversity. Clever biological engineering needs to become a part of how we build. A minimum level of knowledge of wildlife and biology among designers and engineers is desired. Engineers would require access to expertise and appropriate regulations and monitoring to ensure that the reality delivers on the vision. The choice of materials and finishes can also have a positive impact on biodiversity. A best practical guideline is needed in India for the construction of eco-friendly linear infrastructures. The team of CEI WWF can play a crucial role in bringing out this guideline. Just to give my closing remarks, I don't know why I'm not able to move this slide. Okay. So in my concluding remarks, I would only say that it's time to turn India's killer roads into a human highway. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vomik, for your very insightful presentation. It was very eye-opening, and something like this coming from a very engineering leadership like you is something very, very important, and also important need of the hour as well. So thank you very much for that. So with this, I'd like to pose you a question, sir, a follow-up question on what you just presented regarding what is the sort of evolution sort of thing in India. We saw various examples from across the world where these mitigation measures are being implemented in across the countries. But what do you think is the current scenario in India? What is the adoption level in these development authorities who are trying to incorporate these measures? What is the current sort of scenario? And
next, I would say that there is a tremendous impetus on growth, infrastructure growth, as you all know. The government is putting a lot of pressure in 35 kilometer per day to be target is 50 kilometer per day. Focus is there, but of course we have regulations, environmental protocol regulations and all. They have to follow that. So the legal system is in place to to ensure that we are protecting the biodiversity and all. But in reality, I told you that in reality, what happens is there is always a challenge, and when the growth or the development and the protection are fighting with each other, the development always is winning. And the solution.
Not able to hear you.
Is it? Am I audible?
Your voice
you are audible, sir. You are audible, sir.
I'm audible. Okay. So solution is basically, I would think, is basically education. Education to the engineers who are on the job. There is no scarcity of money. It is a will which will help. And that will come only when there is a growing realization about the importance of protecting the biodiversity. I think that sensitization is important, and for which we need to train our engineers. It should be a part of the curriculum. Right from the beginning, it should be a part of training to be conducted by National Highway Authority of India, by the railways, as to how important is biodiversity. It is as important as the life of human beings, for which we if there is a one accident where a life is lost, there is a hue and cry. But you can see number of cases of accidents of large mammals, and that okay, fine, it's one of the many cases like that, it goes unnoticed. So I would think that CEI and WWF, we can have a meeting at the higher level at NHAI, and try to come out with some kind of a mandatory guideline which needs to be followed by all the DPR consultants who are working in road sector, and so that they have to follow that while preparing the scheme itself. First is to avoid. The first choice should be to avoid. Second choice, if we cannot avoid, then these are the steps which needs to be taken.
Thank you very much for this answer, sir. So, as rightly mentioned by you, that IRC needs something as in document that we can definitely work on. So maybe this collaboration will lead to that as well. And one question regarding the course curriculums that should be designed in a way to ensure the upcoming generation that is aligned is what is being focused on. So maybe you'll see some results coming forward in this aspect as well. So we'll be sharing that more later on as well. I'd like to ask Dr. Dipankar, there are some questions in the Q&A section where Dr. Ridhima is answering some of them. So thank you very much for that as well. I'd like to pose one question from Eric Stenhauser to Dr. Ghosh. What are the most pressing communication needs to support broader implementation of nature positive linear infrastructure efforts is his question. Would you like to answer that, sir?
Sure, thank you. That's a great question. The most important part of communication in this is timely communication. Because by the time the NGOs, especially conservation NGOs or scientists, we get to know that such a road expansion is happening or a road is being constructed, already the DPR is made. And at that point of time, to make an intervention and suggesting animal passages means retrofitting, and then budget allocation has to happen, reallocation has to happen, and it gets into a delay, it gets into a financial risk with the loan getting costlier. So I think timely communication is the first thing that I would like to state. And as mentioned by Alokji, is that through this partnership between CEAI and WWF-India, the idea is to reach out to as many engineers, as many developers, planners as possible, so that whenever they get to know that such a road is coming up, please reach out to us. Please reach out to CEAI or WWF and seek suggestions. If we have long-term data between any of the organizations or through our partners, through the State Forest Department, we will be able to at least provide some support on what Alokji said, that whether a site selection is correct or not. That's one. And secondly, for ecological processes, and primarily that involves animal movement, we would be able to give even, not in the entire country, but in the landscapes where we work, our field teams would be able to communicate better, in fact, have in-person meetings with the engineers to show how the animal movement is happening. So that kind of in-field demonstration also helps. The third one, I would say, not just webinars, but we have to create a pool, create something like a bouquet of options, of examples, because India now has a lot of examples. NHAI has some brilliant examples of mitigation measures. So we need to come up with a bouquet of these options to showcase that this is possible. Of course, along with policy advocacy, along with sensitization of the planners, of developers, and the decision makers. I think the strongest form of communication should be to the decision makers who are actually making these decisions of investment and where roads should come. So these four things I would suggest. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. With that follow-up question on to that, I think Nina M. Joseph asks, are there any certifications focusing on sustainability for linear infrastructure, similar to IGBC or LEAD in India or at international level. So is this something that we or any other agencies are thinking about on?
Well, I don't know of any, but that's a good question and a good thought. Alokji, Sudhirji, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, good question. Definitely. You see, very recently, only last month, there was a IRC Council meeting where one document has been cleared, which is on, of course, that is for bridges, but a similar document for highway has already been cleared earlier, which emphasizes on sustainability. And you see, previously, all the projects used to be cleared based on only the cost. Cost was the only factor. But today we have introduced this concept of measuring the carbon footprint for any project as a part of the decision-making process for deciding whether this project is viable or not. And I'm sure once we, keep some factors for passing through the protected areas and sort of put some factor there, then it may work out that bypass may work out to be a cheaper alternative from carbon footprint point of view.
Thank you, sir. We have a last question for this webinar, where considering the time limitations, we'll take only one from here now. Town planner Sib Marawa asks, in the engineering, procurement, and construction mode of development, which checking the implementation of safeguards? Can you please answer that, sir? Alok, sir?
Yeah. So there is a authorities engineer or an independent engineer. In case of a EPC mode of contract, it is authorities engineer. It's a team of people appointed by the authority client, maybe NHAI, maybe Ministry of Transport or state. So this authorities engineer are responsible for basically measuring all this. But the basic point is what I think Dr. Ghosh just now mentioned, that if these aspects are not covered in the DPR, then during the execution of an EPC contract, if you try to bring in any safeguard which is not envisaged in the DPR, that amounts to a variation. And in our ecosystem in India, any variation on the project cost is a big hurdle. No engineer in NHAI at a senior level would approve that so easily. And therefore, it becomes very, very difficult to implement these kind of safeguards unless it is covered in the DPR. So the basic point is, if you want to really cover that in terms of financial costs, then the right place is before it is given for bid.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for that. We'd now like to conclude this webinar. Thank you everyone for your gracious presence in the webinar. Thank you, Mr. Varghese Paul, Mr. Sudhir Dhawan, Dr. Dipankar Ghosh, and Mr. Alok Vomik for your insightful presentation and stories. We're indebted to your immense wealth of knowledge. Thank you. I would like to thank Dr. Ridhima Solanki, WWF-India's coordinator for the Align project in India, for her support and insights in making this webinar a success. Mr. Abhishek Shah, Communication Manager with WWF-India, for supporting us with the operations, and Mr. Somrit, Communication Manager for WWF-India, for hosting this. The collaboration and the webinar has been made possible by the generous support of United States Agency for International Development. Thank you, everyone, and we look forward to meeting you in the next webinar next month on a different theme linked to the linear infrastructure development and biodiversity conservation. We'll ensure that all of today's webinar attendees will be receiving a follow-up email with details of upcoming webinar. Thank you very much. I sign out. Thank you.
Thank you, Pramod ji.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Pramod. All the best.
Thank you.
Bye.